She lived in a small, worn-down orphanage at the edge of the city, a place that always smelled faintly of old wood and dust. The walls were pale yellow, and the sunlight struggled to reach the corners of the rooms. She had been there for as long as she could remember, though she could not recall the exact day she arrived. It was a quiet life, filled with routine and small tasks. She helped sweep the floors, dust the shelves, and sometimes assist in the kitchen. The caretakers were kind but busy, and most of the older children kept to themselves. Despite the quiet, she was never truly alone. Music had been her constant companion since she was very small. She remembered sitting on her mother's lap, her tiny fingers clumsily pressing the keys of a piano that had seen better days. Her mother's hands were gentle and sure, guiding her little hands over the notes. There was a warmth in those moments that she had never felt anywhere else. Even now, she could feel the echo of her mother's touch in every note she played. Though she had not seen her in years, the memories were sharp, sometimes painful, but they were hers and hers alone. The orphanage had an old upright piano in a corner of the common room. It was scratched and chipped, but it worked. Not many of the children used it. Some were too shy, others simply did not care. She, however, found comfort in it. When no one was watching, she would sit for hours, her small fingers brushing the keys, coaxing out melodies that were both sad and beautiful. Sometimes she played pieces she had learned from memory. Sometimes she improvised, letting her feelings flow freely into the music. The sound seemed to carry her away from the gray walls and the quiet hallways, taking her to a world where she felt safe and seen. She did not speak much about her past. The other children asked questions sometimes, but she would smile politely and change the subject. The truth was complicated and painful, and it was easier to keep it hidden. Her mother had been taken away when she was very young. She did not know the reasons fully, only fragments that came from hushed conversations and brief phone calls that she could never quite understand. Sometimes she wondered if her mother thought of her, or if she was even still alive. These thoughts lingered like shadows, following her everywhere, but she kept them locked inside, sharing them only with the piano. Despite the silence around her, she had a sharp awareness of people. She noticed the way the caretaker's hand trembled when she carried too many dishes, or how one of the older girls always seemed to look for the smallest crumb of kindness from anyone who passed by. She learned to read expressions and body language, understanding more from gestures than words. It helped her navigate the small, complex world of the orphanage, where children sometimes played cruel games without thinking, and adults were stretched thin with responsibility. She had learned to protect herself quietly, to remain present but not intrusive, to observe and understand before acting. One of the few joys she allowed herself was in music. The piano was not just an instrument. It was a companion, a friend, a confidant. When she pressed the keys, the weight of loneliness lifted, replaced by a strange, bittersweet hope. She would play lullabies she had once heard from her mother, simple tunes that brought comfort, and sometimes she would compose small pieces, letting the melodies express the feelings she could not put into words. The music filled the room, soft and haunting, touching the hearts of anyone who happened to be near. Though few ever stopped to listen, there were other children who had talents, of course. Some could draw beautifully, some had a way with words, and others excelled in sports or games. But music was hers alone, and she guarded it carefully. It was not something to show off or compete with others. It was private, sacred, a part of her that no one could take away. She played for herself, and sometimes she played for the memory of her mother. Each note was a message she could not send, a way to reach across the distance that had separated them for so long. The orphanage held small events sometimes, where children could show their skills. These were modest affairs, simple gatherings with tea and cookies, where volunteers or local community members came to watch. She usually stayed in the background during these events, watching the other children perform. There were shy smiles, nervous laughter, and clumsy attempts that drew gentle applause. She appreciated the courage it took for anyone to stand up and perform, though she never imagined herself doing the same. Her music was private, too personal to be shared with strangers, even in a safe setting. She had friends, though not many. One or two of the other girls understood her quiet ways and shared small moments of laughter, or secret whispers. They would talk about books, about dreams of the future, and about small plans to make life at the orphanage more bearable. But even with friends, there was a distance, a recognition that each of them carried burdens and secrets that could not be fully shared. She accepted this, learning early that life was often about observing, understanding, and moving carefully through each day. Despite the hardships, she had learned resilience. She rose early each morning, attended her lessons, helped with chores, and found moments of solitude with her music. The piano was always there, waiting for her, ready to receive her thoughts and emotions. In those moments, she was not an orphan, not a child waiting for someone to come for her, but simply herself, connected to a world that made sense through the language of melody. The notes were her voice, stronger and clearer than words could ever be. There were nights when she lay in her small bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about her mother. She wondered if she had been thinking of her too, if somewhere, far away, she was safe and alive. The thought brought both comfort and sorrow. It was a delicate balance, and she carried it silently, letting the music ease the ache. Sometimes, she imagined playing the piano for her mother again, sitting together as they had once done, and letting the notes tell a story of love, loss, and hope. That dream sustained her in the quiet hours when the world felt cold and unfeeling. Her life in the orphanage was simple, often monotonous, but not without moments of beauty. The sunlight that filtered through the windows, the laughter of children in the courtyard, the smell of bread baking in the kitchen, all these small details created a rhythm to her days. She noticed things that others overlooked, finding wonder in small acts of kindness or the subtle changes of the seasons. And always, there was the piano, waiting to transform the ordinary into something extraordinary. She understood the value of patience and quiet observation. The world was not always gentle, and people could be unpredictable. She had learned to read a room, to sense tension, and to find ways to move without drawing unwanted attention. These skills, though born out of necessity, gave her a sense of control in a life that often felt uncertain. She felt a quiet strength in knowing that no matter what happened, she had her music, and through it, she could express what she could not say aloud. The orphanage, for all its limitations, had given her something important, a safe place to grow, to dream, and to hold on to the fragments of a past she cherished. It had also given her the opportunity to watch others, to understand the nuances of human behavior, and to develop empathy for those around her. She had seen children struggle, adults falter, and still, life continued. Through all of it, she had learned to navigate the world with a quiet grace, relying on her inner strength and the music that flowed from her heart. In the mornings, she would walk to the piano after finishing her chores, brushing her fingers across the keys, letting them tremble with anticipation. The first notes would rise slowly, gentle and tentative, and then build into melodies that carried her far beyond the walls of the orphanage. She played with a depth that surprised even herself, as if the piano knew her heart and translated it into sound. Each performance was an intimate conversation, a way to connect with emotions she could not share with anyone else. It was her sanctuary, her voice, and her secret world all at once. She did not seek recognition or praise. The music was enough, a reminder that even in a world that sometimes seemed harsh and unforgiving, she could create beauty. She could hold on to hope, even in small ways, and find solace in the act of expressing herself. The piano was a bridge between her past and present, a link to the mother she missed, and a promise to herself that she would not let life's challenges silence her spirit. And so, day after day, she lived quietly, caring for her surroundings, observing those around her, and finding her voice in the piano. Though she was an orphan in the eyes of the world, in the music, she was whole. Each note she played was a declaration of resilience, love, and the enduring power of hope. It was a quiet, unassuming life, but in her heart, she carried a strength and a longing that could move mountains, even if no one else yet knew it. The morning began like any other, with the faint light spilling through the tall windows of the orphanage. She moved quietly, carrying her small tray from the kitchen to the common room, careful not to spill the porridge that had been prepared for breakfast. The sounds of children chatting and laughing echoed softly through the halls, but she kept to the edges, watching and listening, never quite part of the chatter, but never completely apart either. That day, however, there was a sense of unusual excitement. A few visitors had arrived, people from the local community who were planning a small event for the children. It was meant to be a cheerful gathering, a chance for each child to show a simple talent, a song, or even just a drawing. The idea was to encourage confidence and share joy, and the visitors were warm, smiling faces who seemed genuinely interested in the children's lives. Some of the older children were nervous, fidgeting with their sleeves and whispering encouragement to one another, while the younger ones ran around in excitement, unable to contain their energy. She stood in the corner, her fingers nervously brushing over the edge of the piano keys, She did not usually perform for anyone outside the orphanage, not even for the other children. Music was her private world, her safe place, a place where she could speak without words. And yet, there was something in the air that day, a gentle pressure that made her feel that maybe, just maybe, she could share a little of what she carried inside. She did not know what prompted the thought. Perhaps it was the visitors' kind smiles, or perhaps it was a quiet whisper in her heart that said it was time to reach out, even if just for a moment. The event began in a modest way. One child showed a small drawing of a house surrounded by flowers. Another recited a poem they had memorized, and the applause that followed was gentle but warm. Each act was simple, and yet, each had a touch of bravery, a willingness to put oneself forward despite the fear of judgment. She watched, her chest tightening with a mix of admiration and longing. She wanted to play, to let the music speak, but fear clutched at her. What if she made a mistake? What if no one understood what she was trying to say? She had always been careful, always quiet, and the thought of standing in front of a crowd was daunting. A volunteer, noticing her lingering by the piano, approached with a kind smile. "Would you like to play something for us?" the voice asked, soft and encouraging. She shook her head slightly, looking down at the floor. The volunteer, undeterred, knelt to her level and added gently, "It doesn't have to be anything complicated. Just a simple tune will do, a simple tune." The words floated in her mind, carrying both opportunity and fear. She could play a simple melody, yes, but her heart knew that it would not be enough. There was a story she needed to tell, a longing she needed to release, and the small audience seemed like the perfect, if unexpected, place to let it out. She hesitated, then slowly nodded, her fingers brushing against the keys, feeling the familiar resistance of the worn piano. The children and visitors gathered closer, sensing that something special was about to happen. The room quieted, and she took a deep breath, letting it fill her chest and calm the nerves that trembled like leaves in the wind. The first notes were soft, almost hesitant, but soon they grew steadier, more certain. She did not play the simple tune they expected. Instead, she played a melody that rose and fell with emotion, a piece that seemed to carry the weight of years she had never fully lived, the sadness of separation, and the faint glimmer of hope that had always persisted. The sound filled the room, wrapping around everyone present. It was not loud or showy, but it was powerful in its honesty. Adults paused in their conversation, and the children stopped their fidgeting. Every note seemed to tell a story that went beyond words, a story of love and loss, of longing and courage. Her fingers moved instinctively, guided by memory and heart rather than conscious thought. It was as if the piano itself understood what she wanted to say and helped her speak through it. As she played, images of her mother flooded her mind. She remembered the mornings when she was a tiny child, sitting on her mother's lap while the sunlight streamed through the curtains, her mother's voice gentle and steady, singing lullabies that carried comfort and warmth. Those memories were bittersweet, both a source of pain and a reminder of love that had not vanished entirely. Each note was a whisper to the past, a message of connection that she had longed to send. The audience remained silent, caught in the delicate web of her performance. The volunteers exchanged glances, sensing that this was more than a simple tune. The melody seemed to carry a weight, a depth that hinted at hidden stories and unspoken truths. The children, who had moments ago been restless, now watched with wide eyes, captivated by the beauty and intensity of the music. It was rare for anyone, especially someone so young, to convey such emotion so clearly, and the room seemed to hold its breath, afraid to break the fragile magic. Her mind wandered through memories and feelings she had carefully tucked away. The melody wove in fragments of songs her mother had sung, fragments she had remembered and adapted, letting her fingers tell the story her voice could not. Tears threatened to fall, but she focused on the music, letting it flow through her rather than over her. Each note was a thread connecting her past to the present, and for a moment, the small room disappeared, leaving only the music and the emotions it carried. The performance lasted longer than she intended. She lost track of time, caught in the current of feeling and memory. The final notes lingered in the air, soft and fading, like a sigh of relief after a long struggle. The silence that followed was profound, a recognition of something rare and precious. People shifted in their seats, unsure how to respond, but the impact of her playing was undeniable. The music had spoken in a way words never could, and those who had listened felt it deep in their hearts. A volunteer approached once more, eyes wide with astonishment. "That was incredible," the voice said softly. "You have a gift, something very rare. "I've never heard anything like it from someone your age." She nodded slightly, not fully understanding the praise but feeling the warmth of it. There was a strange mix of pride and humility, a quiet acknowledgement that she had done something important, even if she could not yet put it into words. The children gathered around, their curiosity breaking the spell of silence. They asked questions, their voices filled with excitement and wonder. She answered quietly, smiling when she could, but keeping her attention on the piano. It remained her anchor, her sanctuary, the place where she felt most herself. Even as the crowd dispersed and the event moved on, she returned to the piano, letting her fingers wander over the keys, exploring new melodies and variations, lost in the music once more. That day marked a subtle shift in her life. She had stepped forward, shared a piece of her heart, and realized that the world outside the orphanage could hear her story if she allowed it. It was a tentative step, small and cautious, but it planted a seed of courage that had not existed before. She did not seek recognition, but the experience showed her that music could bridge distances, reach hearts, and perhaps even change lives in ways she had never imagined. The days that followed were quiet again, but something had changed within her. She practiced more deliberately, exploring new melodies, experimenting with rhythms, and letting her emotions guide her. The piano became more than a private companion. It became a voice, a way to communicate when words failed. She realized that her gift could touch others, and with that realization came both responsibility and hope. She wanted to play not just for herself, but for those who might need the music, even if they did not know it yet. She began to notice the reactions of those around her in a new way. The caretakers seemed more attentive, the other children more curious, and even visitors to the orphanage paused a little longer when she played. There was a connection forming, subtle and powerful, between her music and the hearts of others. It was a reminder that even in a life marked by loss and uncertainty, there were ways to reach out, to be seen, and to make a difference, no matter how small it seemed. Her confidence grew slowly. She still struggled with fear and doubt, especially when thinking about performing in front of new people. But the memory of that day gave her courage. She remembered the way the room had fallen silent, the way the music had spoken for her, and the strange, comforting knowledge that she had something unique to offer. It was not about applause or praise. It was about the power to communicate, to connect, and to heal through the language she knew best. Even in quiet moments, she replayed the experience in her mind. She thought about how each note had carried a piece of her heart, how the audience had felt her emotions, and how she had, for a brief moment, felt the presence of her mother in the music. It was a revelation, a quiet understanding that her life, though difficult and uncertain, had purpose and meaning. She had a voice, a way to touch others, and a path forward that she had only just begun to see. As she walked back to her small room that evening, the sun dipping below the horizon, she felt a subtle sense of accomplishment. The day had started like any other, but it had become a turning point, a moment when she discovered that the music she loved could reach beyond her own heart and touch the hearts of others. It was a lesson she would see. The days passed quietly, yet each day carried a subtle change. She felt a growing curiosity in herself, a small but persistent pull toward sharing the music that lived inside her. She would still practice in solitude, letting the piano echo her emotions, but there was now a sense of purpose guiding her fingers. Music had become more than a refuge. It was a way to speak when words could not. One morning, the orphanage received notice of another community gathering. This time, it was larger, with more visitors and volunteers coming from the surrounding neighborhoods. The event was to be held in a small hall near the orphanage, a place she had never seen before. Her heart beat faster when she heard about it. Memories of her last performance mingled with nerves and anticipation. She had learned something important from that experience. When she played with honesty, her music reached people in a way that nothing else could. The morning of the event, she moved through the orphanage with unusual care. She made sure every chore was done, not out of obligation but as a way to calm the nerves fluttering in her stomach. She reached the piano, brushing her fingers across the keys, feeling the familiar comfort of the instrument beneath her hands. It was a moment to center herself, to gather strength and focus before stepping into the unknown. Her mind drifted to thoughts of her mother. She could almost imagine her watching from somewhere, smiling gently, encouraging her to be brave. When they arrived at the hall, she was struck by the size of the room and the number of people waiting. Children and adults filled the seats, their faces filled with expectation. She felt a twinge of fear, but she reminded herself of the quiet strength she had discovered before. She could do this. She had something important to say, and the music would carry it for her. As the event began, children performed simple acts, each receiving polite applause. She waited patiently, observing the reactions of the audience, noticing the small details, the way someone's eyes widened in surprise, the gentle smiles of encouragement, the soft nods of approval. She understood the power of these small gestures, how they could make a child feel seen and valued, and she knew that today, her music could be more than a private expression. It could touch hearts in a way that mattered. Finally, it was her turn. She approached the piano, her hands trembling slightly as she brushed the keys. The audience leaned forward, sensing the quiet intensity she carried. The volunteer who had encouraged her before gave a reassuring nod, and she took a deep breath. The first note was tentative, soft and careful, as if testing the waters. Then, as her confidence grew, the melody unfolded, rich and emotive, telling a story of longing and hope. She did not play a simple tune. Instead, she poured her heart into the music, weaving fragments of melodies she had remembered from her mother with her own improvisations. Each note seemed to rise and fall with her emotions, carrying the weight of years she had lived and the dreams she held close. The audience was silent, captivated by the raw honesty of her performance. The children who had been fidgeting moments before now sat still, eyes wide, as if they could feel the emotions flowing through the keys. Her mind wandered to the memories she cherished, moments with her mother that had shaped her in ways both joyful and painful. She remembered sitting on her mother's lap, feeling the gentle guidance of her hands over the piano keys, hearing lullabies that carried comfort and love. Those memories were bittersweet, reminding her of what she had lost, but also of the strength and love that still lived within her. The music became a bridge, connecting her past and present, carrying her message to anyone willing to listen. As she continued, the room seemed to hold its breath. Adults exchanged glances, sensing that this was more than just a performance. The melody was haunting and beautiful, evoking emotions that could not be named but were deeply felt. Tears threatened to spill in some eyes, and a hush fell over the hall, broken only by the soft, deliberate notes of her playing. She lost herself in the music, forgetting the audience, forgetting the fear, and letting the piano carry her heart. She played with a depth that surprised even herself. The improvisations she added were not random. They were guided by emotion, by the need to tell a story of love, loss, and hope. Each phrase seemed to speak directly to the listener, reaching across the space between her and the audience. The hall was filled not just with sound but with feeling, a tangible presence that wrapped around everyone in the room. It was a moment of pure connection, a rare experience where music became a language of the soul. As the final notes faded, the silence lingered. It was not awkward or uncomfortable. It was reverent, a recognition of the gift that had been shared. People shifted in their seats, unsure how to respond, but the impact of her performance was undeniable. She felt a mixture of relief and quiet triumph. She had done more than play music. She had spoken a truth that could not be captured in words alone. A volunteer approached her after the performance, eyes wide with astonishment. "Your music, it's incredible. I've never heard anything like it," they said softly. She nodded, a faint smile on her lips, feeling the warmth of acknowledgement without fully understanding it. There was a sense of pride, not in herself, but in what she had been able to communicate through the piano. It was proof that her music had meaning beyond her own heart. The other children crowded around, curious and eager to ask questions. They wanted to know how she had learned the piece, what inspired it, and why it sounded so different from anything they had heard before. She answered quietly, keeping her focus on the piano, allowing it to remain the central voice. The curiosity and admiration of her peers gave her confidence, but she also felt a deep responsibility to respect the music, to let it remain sincere and true to her feelings. Later, as she walked back through the hall, she reflected on the experience. She realized that the performance had been more than a moment of courage. It had been a turning point. She had discovered that her music could move people, touch hearts, and communicate feelings that words could not. It was a lesson that she carried with her as she returned to the orphanage, a quiet determination to continue growing and sharing her gift. Back at the orphanage, she resumed her routine, but her practice sessions took on new depth. She experimented with different melodies, explored variations on familiar tunes, and allowed her emotions to guide her fingers more freely. The piano was no longer just a companion. It was a channel for communication, a bridge between her inner world and the outside world. Each day, she discovered new ways to express herself, new layers of feeling and storytelling that could be woven into her music. Her relationship with the other children shifted subtly as well. They began to approach her with more interest and respect, drawn by the power of her performances. Some asked to sit with her while she played, listening quietly as she explored new melodies. Others shared their own attempts at music or art, inspired by the courage she had shown. The orphanage, once a place of quiet routine, began to feel more vibrant, alive with small but meaningful connections. Even the caretakers noticed the change. They observed her growing confidence and the way she seemed to carry herself with quiet assurance. They encouraged her to continue playing, arranging small opportunities for her to share her music in private gatherings and community events. Each time she performed, the audience responded with genuine attention and emotion, reinforcing the understanding that her music had the power to touch people in ways she had never imagined. She also began to notice the subtle impact on herself. The act of performing, of sharing her emotions through the piano, brought a sense of clarity and calm. It allowed her to process feelings she had carried for years, transforming sorrow into beauty and fear into courage. Each performance, each practice session, became an exercise in resilience and self-expression, helping her to navigate the challenges of her life with greater strength and insight. One quiet evening, she sat at the piano after the day's chores, the fading light casting long shadows across the room. She played a new melody, one that felt lighter yet still carried the weight of memory. As her fingers moved across the keys, she imagined her mother listening, smiling at the beauty of the music, and feeling the love that had never faded. The thought brought tears, but they were tears of release, of connection, and of hope. The music flowed, carrying all of it, transforming it into something that could be shared and understood. She realized, in that moment, that the piano was not just an instrument, nor was it merely a companion. It was a way to communicate with the world, to reach out when words failed, and to connect with people in the most profound way. It had given her courage, insight, and a sense of purpose she had never known. The journey was far from over, but she felt ready to take the next steps, whatever they might be, guided by the music that lived within her. And so, her days continued, filled with practice, reflection, and small moments of connection. The orphanage became a place of both learning and expression, a place where her gift could grow and be shared with those willing to listen. She had discovered something powerful, that even in a life marked by uncertainty and loss, there were ways to create beauty, to touch hearts, and to find strength in what seemed like the quietest of acts. Her music had begun to tell her story, and she knew that it had the power to change. Weeks passed after the community event, and she continued her quiet life at the orphanage. Yet the memory of her last performance stayed with her. She practiced daily, exploring melodies that carried fragments of memory and hope. Each note seemed to strengthen her, giving her courage she had never known before. Music had become more than a private escape. It was a language she had discovered that could touch hearts. One morning, a social worker came to the orphanage, carrying a folder of papers and an urgent look in her eyes. She asked to speak with the children, explaining that a special visitor had arrived from a nearby hospital. The visitor was looking for someone with a unique gift, someone whose music might help in a very personal situation. The words caught her attention, though she tried to remain calm. Something in the tone of the social worker suggested that this was different from the usual events, that this time, her music could matter in ways she could not yet imagine. The children were gathered in the common room, and she found herself standing at the edge, unsure if she should step forward. The social worker scanned the room, and then her eyes rested on the girl by the piano. There was a brief moment of recognition, a flash of understanding that seemed to pass silently between them. The social worker gestured toward the piano and said, "Could you play something for me? Just a melody you feel in your heart." The simplicity of the request calmed her, but there was also a sense of urgency that she could not ignore. She approached the piano, her hands trembling slightly as they hovered over the keys. She took a deep breath and began to play. The first notes were tentative, delicate, but soon they blossomed into a melody rich with emotion. It was not a simple tune. It was a song woven from memory, longing, and love. She did not need to think about the notes. They flowed from her heart, carrying messages she could not speak aloud. The music filled the room, touching everyone present with its depth and beauty. As she played, the social worker's expression changed. There was a recognition in her eyes, a memory stirred by the melody. She leaned forward, listening intently, and then something remarkable happened. The tune she was playing matched an old recording that had been stored in a file for years. It was a song connected to a missing woman who had been searching for her child for a long time. The recognition was immediate and profound. The music, played by the girl, was the key that unlocked a story that had been waiting for years to be completed. The social worker quickly took out a phone and called the hospital, explaining that they had found the child linked to the recording. The girl's hands continued to move over the keys, unaware of the connection she had created. The melody carried the pain of separation, the yearning of a mother for her child, and the quiet hope that love could endure despite years of distance. It was as if the music itself was bridging the gap, connecting the past and the present, and creating a path for reunion. Meanwhile, in the hospital, the woman who had been searching for her child sat quietly, listening to the faint recording of the melody. She had remembered the song, the way it had sounded when she sang it to her daughter years ago. Tears welled in her eyes as she realized that the music had not been forgotten, that the connection she feared lost forever might still exist. The hospital staff, sensing the emotional weight of the moment, allowed her to play the recording again. Each note was a thread pulling her toward hope, toward the possibility of reunion. Back at the orphanage, the social worker explained to the girl that her music had uncovered something extraordinary. She had unknowingly played the song that would lead to her mother. The girl's eyes widened, a mix of disbelief and cautious excitement filling her. The thought of seeing her mother again, of reconnecting with the person who had once been her whole world, was both thrilling and terrifying. She had imagined this moment countless times, but now it was real, and she felt the weight of its significance. The arrangements were made quickly. The social worker coordinated with the hospital staff, ensuring that the meeting could happen safely. The girl was guided gently, her heart pounding with anticipation, her fingers brushing the piano one last time before the journey. She had practiced her emotions as much as her music, preparing herself for the reunion that had been years in the making. Each step she took felt heavy with meaning, yet lightened by the hope that she might finally be whole again. When she arrived at the hospital, the atmosphere was tense but filled with expectation. The woman was sitting quietly, her hands clasped, listening for any sign that her child had been found. The moment the girl entered, there was a pause, a brief hesitation as they took in each other's presence. Neither spoke at first. The air seemed charged with the weight of years, of lost time, of love that had endured despite distance and hardship. Then, softly, she began to play. The piano was set up in the hospital room, and she allowed the melody to flow naturally. The woman's eyes widened in recognition, tears streaming down her face as she realized that this was the song she had sung to her daughter so long ago. The music spoke for both of them, expressing the emotions that had been buried under years of uncertainty and longing. Every note carried a message of love, hope, and reunion. As the final notes faded, the silence that followed was profound. The woman reached out slowly, her hands trembling, and the girl stepped closer. There was a moment of hesitation, as if the world had stopped to allow them to reconnect. Then, finally, they embraced. The warmth of the hug, the closeness they had longed for, and the tears of relief and joy created a scene filled with raw, genuine emotion. The music had not only told their story, but had guided them to this moment of reunion. The hospital staff and social worker watched quietly, understanding the significance of what had happened. This was more than a reunion. It was a restoration of a bond that had been fractured by circumstances beyond their control. The girl's courage, her dedication to music, and her willingness to express what she felt had created a bridge that no words or actions could have built alone. The piano, her constant companion, had become the instrument of destiny, connecting hearts across years and distance. In the days that followed, mother and child spent time together, learning to know each other again, sharing stories and creating new memories. The bond that had been interrupted was now renewed, strengthened by the trials they had endured and the love that had never faded. Music continued to play a central role in their relationship, a language that allowed them to express feelings that words could not fully capture. The melodies she played carried the essence of their connection, a living reminder of the journey they had taken to be together. The girl returned to the orphanage occasionally, but her life had changed profoundly. She carried a sense of purpose, a recognition that her music could touch lives and create extraordinary moments. The experience had taught her that even in a life marked by uncertainty and loss, there were ways to create meaning, to connect with others, and to transform pain into beauty. Each performance became an act of hope, a way to share a piece of her heart with the world. The reunion also brought a sense of closure. She understood that her mother had never stopped loving her, that circumstances had separated them, but the bond remained unbroken. The music had been the key, and the realization filled her with gratitude, humility, and a renewed sense of self. It was a powerful lesson that even when life seemed unfair or uncertain, courage, talent, and sincerity could create miracles. She continued to practice and perform. But now there was a new depth to her music. Each note carried the story of their reunion, the triumph of love over separation, and the hope that connection could endure despite the odds. Her audience grew, not just in numbers but in emotional engagement. As people were moved by the authenticity and feeling in her playing, the girl had discovered the true power of music. It could heal, connect, and restore what seemed lost forever. Life moved forward, gently but steadily. She and her mother spent time together whenever possible, sharing moments of joy, sorrow, and music. Their bond deepened, enriched by the understanding that they had survived years apart yet remained connected by love. The orphanage continued to be a part of her life, a place where she nurtured her talent and shared it with others. The events she had performed at became opportunities not just to show skill, but to touch hearts, inspire courage, and offer hope to those who listened. Through it all, she learned that music was more than sound. It was a language of the soul, a means to communicate across time, distance, and circumstance. It had led her to her mother, restored a broken bond, and opened doors she had never imagined. She carried this lesson forward, letting each note she played be a testament to resilience, love, and the enduring power of hope. The piano had given her voice, and she used it to speak the language of her heart, creating a story of reunion, courage, and the unbreakable bond between a mother and child. The days after the reunion were filled with quiet joy and careful rediscovery. She and her mother spent long hours together, learning each other's rhythms, gestures, and habits. Words were exchanged, stories were shared, but the language of music remained the strongest connection. The piano became a bridge between their hearts, each note a reaffirmation of the bond that time and distance could not sever. Back at the orphanage, she continued her routines, but something inside her had shifted. She walked with a subtle confidence, aware now that her gift had the power to change lives. Music had reunited her with her mother, and she realized that its reach could extend beyond her own story. She began to see herself not just as an orphan or a child who had been separated from her family, but as someone capable of inspiring hope, healing pain, and connecting hearts through melody. She started composing her own pieces, delicate and intricate, each one carrying the story of her journey. Some were quiet, reflective pieces for solitary listening, while others were powerful, sweeping melodies meant to be shared with audiences. The piano allowed her to express emotions that were too complex for words, emotions that had been nurtured in the quiet corners of the orphanage, and strengthened by the extraordinary experience of reuniting with her mother. Occasionally, she returned to the hospital to play for patients and staff, guided by the social worker who had helped her reconnect with her mother. She played for children who were scared or lonely, for adults who had faced hardship, and for anyone who needed a moment of comfort. Each performance was a gift, and she realized that the music that had saved her mother's life could now offer solace and inspiration to others. Her talent became a way to give back, a way to use the gifts she had been given to touch the lives of those around her. Her mother watched these performances with pride and wonder. She saw the courage and depth in her daughter's playing, recognizing the resilience that had carried her through years of separation and uncertainty. They would sit together after each performance, talking about the melodies, the emotions behind them, and the possibilities for the future. Music had brought them together, and it now guided them forward, a constant companion in both joy and challenge. The orphanage also became a place of change. Children who once kept their talents hidden began to explore their own skills more openly. They were inspired by her courage and the way her music had reached hearts. Small recitals were arranged, drawing attention from local communities, volunteers, and even visiting musicians. The environment became richer, more vibrant, and more nurturing. She had discovered that sharing one's gift could create ripples, encouraging others to find their voice and use it. Through all these experiences, she continued to grow not only as a musician but as a person. She learned patience, empathy, and resilience. She understood the value of listening, observing, and feeling deeply before acting. Life had taught her that moments of joy and love were often intertwined with struggle, and that true connection required openness, courage, and honesty. Her music became a reflection of this understanding, a tapestry of emotions that spoke to the universality of human experience. One day, a local community center asked her to perform for a larger audience. It was an intimidating prospect, but she had learned to trust her instincts and the power of her music. As she approached the piano, she felt the familiar calm settle over her. The first notes rose gently, delicate and intentional, And then the melody unfolded, carrying the depth of her experiences, the warmth of her reunion, and the hope that had always guided her. The audience was captivated. The music moved through the room, touching hearts in ways that words could not. Children watched in awe, adults wiped tears from their eyes, and even those who had come skeptical were drawn in by the authenticity and emotion of her playing. It was a moment of profound connection, a reminder that music, when played with sincerity and love, could transcend barriers and bring people together. After the performance, she returned to the piano in the quiet of the empty hall. She let her fingers wander over the keys, improvising melodies that reflected the day, her emotions, and the gratitude she felt. The silence that followed each note was as important as the sound itself, a space for reflection and understanding. She realized that her journey had come full circle, from a lonely child finding solace in a piano, to a young woman using music to heal, inspire, and connect. Her mother joined her, sitting beside her quietly, listening to the melodies unfold. They did not need words to communicate. The music was enough. Each note spoke of love, resilience, hope, and reunion. The years of separation and longing had transformed into strength and purpose, and the piano had carried them through every step of the journey. They shared smiles, sometimes tears, and always a sense of deep connection that needed no explanation. She also began teaching other children at the orphanage, showing them how to play, guiding their fingers on the keys, and encouraging them to explore their own feelings through music. It was a way to pass on what she had learned, to give them the courage to express themselves, and to create a community where music could nurture growth, confidence, and connection. The orphanage became a place alive with melody, laughter, and learning, a stark contrast to the quiet, routine life it had once been. Through these experiences, she came to understand that the power of music lay not just in talent or technical skill, but in honesty and emotional expression. A melody played with heart could reach places that words could not, heal wounds that seemed permanent, and build bridges between people separated by time, distance, or circumstance. Her gift had led to the reunion with her mother, and now it extended beyond them, touching the lives of many others. Years passed, and she continued to grow as both a person and a musician. The journey had taught her the value of courage, patience, and authenticity. She understood that life would always have challenges, but that there were ways to navigate them with grace and resilience. The piano remained her constant companion, a trusted friend and a voice for her heart. Every performance, every melody, was a testament to the journey she had taken and the lessons she had learned. Her story became known in the local community, inspiring others to pursue their passions, embrace their talents, and find courage in their own lives. She remained humble, always aware that her gift was meant to be shared, not hoarded. She used it to bring joy, comfort, and hope, understanding that the simplest melody, played with sincerity, could have a profound impact. As she sat at the piano one evening, her mother beside her, she reflected on the journey, from the quiet corners of the orphanage to the moment of reunion. Through fear, courage, and discovery, music had been her guide, her voice, and her lifeline. She understood that every note carried a story, every melody a message, and every performance an opportunity to touch hearts. The piano had saved her mother, had reconnected them, and had given her a purpose that would continue to unfold for the rest of her life. In the end, she knew that the music was more than a talent. It was a gift of connection, a source of healing, and a bridge between hearts. It had changed her life and the life of her mother, and it would continue to bring hope to anyone willing to listen. The journey was far from over, but with each note she played, she carried forward the lessons of love, courage, and the enduring power of a melody that could speak when words were not enough.